Okay, so let's use these concepts from the previous slide to graph cosine and sine equations that are not just y equals sine and y equals cosine. Before we do that though, I do just want to touch base. You've got to make sure that you know how to graph the traditional, just regular parent function of these, y equals sine and y equals cosine. So I'm going to kind of teach you just some little tricks that I do to remember how these look. First thing is, you do 5 tick marks. So you always start at 0. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you've got your max and your min. Okay, so for the sine function, typically, so for the sine function, you start at the midline, you end at the midline, halfway between you're at the midline, halfway between those two you're at the max, halfway between these two you're at the min. You can kind of see the pattern, and that's the best advice I can give you, is just to memorize this pattern. For cosine, you start at the max, you end at the max, halfway in between you're at the min, halfway in between those you're at the midline. Okay, so make sure you do have those memorized, and it'll make your life so much easier for all of these things. Okay, so first things first is, when I'm graphing, I always write out the amplitude, the midline, the period, the if there's any horizontal shift, and then where your tick mark should be. That's the key. If you can get these tick marks down to know what these different scales should be, this is pretty easy peasy smoothie sailing. Smoothie sailing, smooth sailing. So first things first, amplitude. So our amplitude, remember, is that the absolute value of the A value. So our A value is 3. Absolute value of that is 3. Your midline is what you're adding or subtracting on the outside of the function. So here we're adding 1. So our midline is going to be y equals 1. Again, make sure you write it as the equation of a line. Your period. So that period is 2 pi over b. So our b value is pi over 2. Okay, dividing by a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So what's nice about this is these are going to cancel, and we'll just get 4. So our period is 4. Horizontal shift, so that's if you're adding or subtracting anything on the inside of the function. So in this case, we're not, so there's none. And I'll tell you in this section, we're not going to have any horizontal shifts. It's going to be the next one where we add that part in. And then your tick marks. So your tick marks, to figure out the value for the distance between each tick marks, you take your period and you divide it by 4. So here our period was 4, so I get 1. And you'll see where that comes into play with making our lives a lot easier for graphing. Okay, so we go through and graph this. All right, this is the cosine. So we've got, let's see, so whenever you're doing this, so you've got your 5 tick marks. So since there's no horizontal shift, the first one's going to be at 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cool, got that. And then, so let's see. So we know that the distance between our tick marks is 1. So that means from 0, add 1 to that and I get 1. Add another 1 and I get 2, 3, and then 4. All right, so now for figuring out the amplitude. So our midline is at y equals 1. So I'm going to just draw that in there. You don't have to draw these, but for me it's very helpful. So there's 1. So y equals 1 is the midline. And we've got our amplitude is 3. So that means I'm going to have to go up 3 for my maximum. So that's at 4. And then down 3 for my minimum, so that's going to be at -2. So now I've got my maximum's going to be here, my minimum's going to be here. So kind of by putting those in, it's really helpful, especially once you already know those properties for where to go for your cosine. So this is cosine, so for a cosine graph, you start at the maximum, end at the maximum. So start here, our period ends at 4, so ends there. Halfway in between, you're at the minimum. Halfway in between those, you're at the midline. Halfway in between these, you're at the midline as well. So there you go. Make sure you extend this because this does continue to repeat itself over and over again. Okay, so now let's do a little more complicated one. So if we have y equals f of x equals the -3 sine of x plus 1. Okay, so we've got, always write this out. So amplitude, midline, period, horizontal shift, and we're still going to write this even though there are none in this section just because you want to get in that habit, and then your tick marks. Okay, so the amplitude is going to be the absolute value of -3, so that's going to be at 3. Our midline is going to be at y equals 1. Our period, so there's no value that will, technically the value that's in there is 1, so it'd be 2 pi divided by 1, which is just 2 pi. Horizontal shift is none, and then your tick marks are the period divided by 4. So the period divided by 4 gives me pi over 2. So each tick mark is going to be at pi over 2. Okay, so now we'll go to kind of set this up. Okay, so we've got our 5 tick marks. Since there's no horizontal shift, the first one's going to start right at 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and we know that the distance between each tick mark is pi over 2. So from 0, add pi over 2, and I get pi over 2. Now take pi over 2, add another pi over 2. So pi over 2 plus pi over 2 is 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Add another pi over 2. Pi plus pi over 2, get that common denominator, and that'll give us 3 pi over 2. And then for that last one, you take 3 pi over 2, add a pi over 2 to that, and you'll get 4 pi over 2, which reduces to 2 pi. So now we've got our tick marks for the horizontal axes. Now we need to figure out for the vertical. So our midline is at y equals 1. And then we know that our amplitude is 3, so we're going to go up 3, 2, 3, so that's going to be at 4, and then down 3, so 1, 2, 3, -2. So that means our maximum value is going to be at 4, our minimum's at -2. And again, you don't need to do these dashed lines, but I'm just doing it right now just to kind of show you guys how these work. Now typically with the sine function, again, if you've memorized kind of that pattern, is with the sine function, you start at the midline, you end at the midline, in the middle you're at the midline, in between those you're at the max, in between these last two you're at the min. So that's what the sine typically looks like. However, this negative is going to kind of throw it in for a wrench. So this is one you're going to have to remember back in Math 111 when you have a negative in front. That means that you're going to reflect the graph over the x-axis. So that means instead of having our maximum be that first value that comes up, now this is going to reflect over, and that's going to be my minimum. Just like here, instead of ending at the minimum, that's going to reflect over, and that's going to become the maximum. Okay, so when I go to graph this, so again, the sine function, you start at the midline, you end at the midline, halfway in between you're at the midline. Now, typically you're at the maximum halfway in between those, but because of that reflection, we're reflecting that over, we're going to be down here. Again, halfway in between these two, you're normally at the minimum, but we're reflecting that over, which is going to put us up here. So there you go. Okay, let's do a few more. So when I'm looking at this one here, we can rewrite this because I think it's a little confusing when you have a negative in front. So remember, -1 plus 2, that equals 1. 2 minus 1 also equals 1. So I can change the order that these are happening in. So I can rewrite this as 3 sine of 2x minus 1. And I think by doing that, it makes it a little bit easier to see what your midline is, your period, and your amplitude. All right, so let's write those out. So we've got amplitude, midline, the period, horizontal shift, and then the tick marks. And again, remember that traditional sine function. Start at the midline, end at the midline. In between you're at the midline. Between those you're at the max, those you're at the min. Okay, so let's see. We've got our amplitude is going to be 3. Our midline is this -1, so it's y equals -1. Our period is 2 pi divided by b. That b value is 2, so that gives me pi as my period. Horizontal shift, there's none because there's nothing on the inside that's getting added or subtracted. And then our tick marks are always the period divided by 4, so it's pi over 4. So when I go to set this up, so there's no horizontal shift, so I'm going to start here. That's my first tick mark at 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The distance between each midpoint is pi over 4. So from 0 plus pi over 4 is pi over 4. Add another pi over 4. So pi over 4 plus pi over 4 gives me 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. Add another pi over 4, and I'm going to be at pi over 2 plus pi over 4, which is 2 pi over 4 plus pi over 4. I got a common denominator, so that's going to put me at 3 pi over 4. And then if I add another pi over 4 to that, I'm at pi, which is great because that should be what my period is. Okay, so we've got our midline is at -1. And then I've got my amplitude is 3, so we're going to go up 3. So your maximum is going to be at 2, and then you're going to go down 3. So your minimum's at -4. Okay, so there's no reflection, so that's good. So we're going to, again, for the sine function, you start at the midline, end at the midline, in between you're at the midline. So start at the midline, end at the midline, in between you're at the midline. In between these two, you're at the maximum. In between these two, you're at the minimum. There you go.